Sometimes the greatest truths arrive quietly, like wind slipping through a crack and transforming everything around it. The book of Obadiah is like that, small in size, yet powerful enough to shake hearts and tear down walls of pride. Who would have thought that so few words could carry such a thunderclap? While the world shouts, rushes, and fidgets, Obadiah whispers. He speaks straight to your soul. No detours. No distractions. Pride, arrogance, the silent injustices that leave invisible scars. All of it he exposes with the precision of a divine archer. Can you feel the weight of these words? It's as if each verse looks directly into your soul and whispers, "Are you ready to see the truth about yourself?" Many pass by this book thinking, "It's too short. It can't be that significant." But here lies the paradox. Its brevity is its strength, holding the reader captive like an arrow hitting the heart silently. In just a few verses, you experience God's justice, hope blossoming from pain, and restoration that never fails. Imagine entire nations falling, pride crumbling, yet God's faithfulness standing firm like a mountain. Obadiah transforms history into lessons, pain into understanding, judgment into an invitation to reflection. Every word is a spark, every sentence a wake-up call. And now comes the question that echoes across time. Will you let this little book enter your life and awaken your faith, your hope, and your spirituality? Obadiah is like a quiet flame in a vast, starry sky. A minor prophet, yes, but with a voice that echoes God's authority throughout the Old Testament. His book, the shortest in the Bible, is brief like a whisper, yet deep as thunder. He doesn't appear in grand scenes. He doesn't lead armies. He doesn't build temples. His greatness lies in being God's spokesperson against Edom. In this simplicity, we learn that God's sovereignty isn't measured by the size of the pages, but by the power of the prophetic message. The historical context of Obadiah is one of conflict. Edom, descended from Esau, lived in rivalry with Israel, descended from Jacob. The enmity between these brothers lasted centuries and became a symbol of pride and vengeance that poisoned entire nations. Who hasn't felt the weight of injustice? Who hasn't faced disdainful looks or the cold silence of someone rejoicing in their downfall? Obadiah shows us that God's justice is never delayed. He acts when the human heart no longer has the strength to fight. And if in just 21 verses we find so much power, imagine what is still to come. The book of Obadiah, this hidden treasure in the Old Testament, opens doors to reflections that touch not only Israel's history, but our own lives today. Edom lived in the mountains, protected by walls of stone, believing themselves untouchable. Their hearts swelled with pride, as if the very rocks were eternal. But Obadiah raised his voice to declare, "Not even those hiding on high can escape God's judgment." Edom's arrogance was like a thick cloud that blinded their eyes. They rejoiced when Israel suffered, celebrating Jacob's pain as if it were their victory. That cruel joy became their own condemnation, for God's justice never fails. How many times does the human heart repeat the same mistake? We rely on wealth, diplomas, positions, walls of concrete, even digital followers. But when life shakes, none of that sustains us. Only God's faithfulness is a true rock. Only His protection is eternal. The prophecy against Edom is also a mirror for us. It exposes hidden pride in small actions, looking down on others, judging without love, remaining silent before injustice. Obadiah's eternal message calls us to humility and repentance. Edom believed their fortress was indestructible, but they discovered that even mountains fall before God's authority. Obadiah's fulfilled prophecy is not just historical memory. It is a living warning, preparing the heart for the next steps in this story. The rivalry between Edom and Israel began in Rebekah's womb. Two brothers struggled even before taking their first breath. Esau and Jacob, the tension that started in silence, grew into centuries of resentment between their nations. Esau, strong and rugged in appearance, seemed the natural heir. Jacob, cunning and quiet, clung to his brother's heel, as if saying, "I will not give up." That act became a symbol of the struggle between human pride and divine promise. Edom never forgot the lost blessing, and Israel carried the weight of the divine choice. The conflict grew like a bitter root, passing from generation to generation. These were not just border disputes. They were spiritual wounds left open from the beginning. Who hasn't experienced something similar? Families divided, words that hurt repeating for years, resentment that feels endless. The rivalry of Esau and Jacob echoes in our own pains, reminding us that disobedience and vengeance carry deep consequences. Obadiah saw in this conflict not just an ancient feud, but a portrait of the struggle between pride and humility. His prophecy against Edom is also a call to reconciliation and trust in God. But is there always a way back when the wounds seem eternal? The day arrived when Edom's pride met an unshakable wall, God's judgment. No rock, fortress, or human wisdom could escape his eternal gaze. What once seemed secure dissolved like sand in the wind. Obadiah raised his voice and proclaimed, "Just as you rejoiced over Israel's fall, now you will taste the same cup." God's judgment is not mere punishment. It is a just response to injustice, restoring balance to what sin has disturbed. As we read this prophecy, we cannot ignore the lesson. How often do we rely on false securities? Houses, bank accounts, status, everything can crumble in an instant. Only God's faithfulness endures. Only his justice stands the test of time. God's judgment on Edom reveals a timeless spiritual principle. No one can mock another's suffering without facing consequences. Those who plant disdain will harvest downfall. Those who live in pride will inevitably meet their collapse. And in the silence of this judgment, we learn something deeper. God's justice never fails, yet it also prepares the path for restoration. The fall of enemies is only the prelude to the greater purpose Obadiah unveils. Edom, once proud of its fortresses, now descended from the heights like a wounded eagle. Those who once looked down on Israel became an example of how arrogance cannot withstand God's judgment. The pride of nations crumbles before eternity. Obadiah did not speak only of mountains and ruined cities. He conveyed an eternal principle. When someone exalts themselves, they will eventually be humbled. God's justice is never delayed. It is fulfilled at the perfect moment, even when people doubt. How often does life feel unfair? How often do we see the arrogant prosper while the righteous suffer? The fulfilled prophecy against Edom reminds us that nothing escapes God's gaze. There is a time for everything, even for the fall of enemies. Yet judgment is not only to punish, it also teaches. It shapes hearts, awakens consciences, and reminds each generation that no power surpasses God's sovereignty. It is like fire refining gold, harsh in process, but glorious in outcome. And as Edom fell, Israel received the promise that God's justice never abandons his children. This contrast between downfall and restoration reveals more than divine vengeance. It reveals the greater purpose that Obadiah sought to unveil. As Edom fell into ruins, a promise appeared like light on the horizon for Israel. God's judgment is not only destruction, it is also a proclamation of hope. Restoration comes like rain on dry ground, renewing the faith of a weary people. Obadiah showed that God's justice never abandons those who trust in him. Even when Israel seemed lost among hostile nations, God's faithfulness remained firm. Where humans saw only defeat, the Lord saw revival and life. The promise of restoration is a powerful reminder. God never writes the final word in the midst of tragedy. He always holds a chapter of reconciliation. How many times in our own lives have we thought all was lost, only to discover that he had a fresh start reserved? Israel learned that God's protection is not the absence of struggles, but his presence amid chaos. Restoration was not merely politica, It was spiritual. A call to repentance, humility, and practical faith that bears fruit for the future. Thus, in the same book that exposes Edom's pride, a timeless message of hope blooms for Israel. The contrast between judgment and promise, Obadiah's writing is not only for a distant generation. His message transcends time. Every word echoes God's authority, reminding us that he rules over nations and hearts. It is a call to awareness and spiritual discernment. Obadiah's purpose goes beyond historical record. He teaches spiritual principles that remain relevant today. Humility, obedience, faith, and trust in God are not ancient concepts. They are practical guides for contemporary life. Those who read learn to reflect on their own choices and behaviors. The prophetic message also warns against disobedience and pride. When arrogance rises, the heart is blinded, and sin produces inevitable consequences. Obadiah invites us to examine our motivations and cultivate character that honors God's justice. But there is also an invitation to hope. Even amid hostile nations, conflict, and downfall, God keeps his promises. He protects, reconciles, and offers restoration to those who sincerely seek him. This balance between judgment and hope is the essence of the eternal message. As we reflect on Obadiah's purpose, we realize that reading the shortest book in the Bible is like holding a key that opens doors to profound understanding. Each verse carries lessons in life, spiritual discernment, and practical faith, preparing the reader for the deeper revelations still to come. Edom's pride is more than history. It is a mirror for the human soul. Every act of arrogance, every disdain for others, is a seed of future downfall. Obadiah warns us to look inward before pointing outward. The spiritual lesson is clear. Humility is not weakness. It is strength. Obedience, trust, and practical faith are acts of daily courage. Those who walk with God learn that true greatness is born in simplicity and quiet reverence. Obadiah's reflection also teaches us about the consequences of sin. Disobedience brings pain. Spiritual neglect produces ruin. But repentance opens doors to restoration, showing that we are not bound by past failures. Practical examples emerge from each verse, acknowledging mistakes, reconciling with those we have hurt, protecting the vulnerable. Spirituality is not abstract. It is action, practical faith that transforms lives. As we meditate on this eternal message, we realize that the shortest book in the Bible becomes a continuous guide for study and reflection. Obadiah invites us to learn justice against injustice and trust in God's sovereignty in all circumstances. Although written thousands of years ago, the book of Obadiah remains incredibly relevant. The pride of nations and injustice toward the vulnerable still echo in our world. Its timeless message reminds us that God's justice does not change with time. Obadiah invites us to reflect on our own lives. How often do we act with arrogance or disdain? How often do we forget humility and practical faith? He challenges us to trust fully in God's protection and authority. The relevance of Obadiah also appears in everyday situations. Workplace rivalries, family conflicts, or social injustices. The fulfilled prophecy against Edom shows that divine judgment never fails and that God's justice extends to every corner of human history. At the same time, his message of hope reminds us that restoration is possible. God reconciles, protects, and provides a new path. This promise is vital for those seeking to live with faith, obedience, and trust in his sovereignty. Reflecting on Obadiah today, we understand that each verse is an invitation to introspection, practical application of faith, and spiritual discernment. It prepares us for the final chapter of this story, where the depth of the message is revealed even more. The book of Obadiah ends as it began, with words that echo beyond time. Its eternal message reminds us that pride falls, but faith, humility, and obedience endure. It is a call to daily transformation of the soul. Applying Obadiah today means examining our actions, confronting pride, and seeking justice in our choices. Every decision, every word, is an opportunity to reflect God's authority in our lives. Practical faith does not wait. It manifests in daily life. The prophetic message also teaches hope and restoration. Even when all seems lost, God offers reconciliation and protection. Obadiah shows that God's judgment is not empty vengeance, but part of his greater purpose. It also teaches us to discern the spirit behind our own decisions. Pride, disobedience, or distrust pull us away from the path. Humility, repentance, and trust draw us closer to God's promise. Each lesson is a spiritual compass. Closing the shortest book in the Bible, we realize that every verse invites us to live with wisdom, faith, and courage. Obadiah's message remains alive, guiding us in justice against injustice and showing the power of God's authority and purpose. Now that we have explored Obadiah's profound message, the question arises, will you let these lessons remain only in reading, or will you apply them in your life? Pride must be confronted, humility must flourish, and practical faith must manifest in every daily decision. Think of the injustices you have witnessed or endured. Did you respond with arrogance or with trust in God? Every choice is an opportunity to practice repentance, reconciliation, and justice. Obadiah teaches that life changes when we allow the eternal message to guide our actions. Are you willing to trust God's sovereignty even when everything seems lost? His protection is not a vague promise. It is constant, secure presence amid chaos, hope that rises even after a fall. Ask yourself, am I living up to my faith or hiding behind walls of pride? If you felt this connection, leave a comment. Which lesson from Obadiah touched your heart today? Share your reflection and inspire others to see the power of God's justice, restoration, and practical faith. Your experience could be the spark that ignites transformation in another heart. And don't forget, subscribe and activate notifications to continue exploring the mysteries of the Bible. Uncover deep messages like Obadiah's, and learn to apply spiritual principles that transform lives. God bless your life.